Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. A little over 6 months ago, most of us had no idea what contact tracing was. We strolled through our daily lives blissfully unaware of the profound and pervasive interconnectivity of every life on the planet. We had witnessed a different type of coronavirus called SARS in 2003, but it didn't penetrate our global consciousness. Back then, SARS jumped from mainland China to Hong Kong in February 2003, when a visiting professor who unknowingly had SARS checked into room 911 at Hong Kong's Metropole Hotel. I kid you not, room 911. By the time he checked out a few days later, he had spread the virus to at least 8 other guests who unwittingly took it with them to Singapore, Toronto, Hong Kong, and Hanoi, where the virus continued to spread person to person. Of the more than 7,700 cases of SARS worldwide, the WHO estimates that more than 4,000 can be traced to one man's stay in room 911. This time, the virus could not be contained, despite the shutdown of nearly the entire planet. 6 months after the virus jumped from Wuhan, China, over 24 million people have contracted the virus, and we are approaching 1 million deaths worldwide. This virus has taught us many things, but among its most important lessons is that no one of us stands alone. We are part of a wide web of relationships, friends, and friends of friends, and friends of friends of friends. We have learned just how tightly our fate depends on what's happening in this invisible network over which we have no control. As someone recently said, we are not just all in the same boat, we are all in the same storm. This morning we read the creation story, which culminates in the creation of the first person, Adam. And after each act of creation, God declares, Ki Tov, it is good. But after creating Adam, for the first time, God declares, Lo Tov, it is not good. Lo Tov heot Adam levado, it is not good for a person to be alone. We are deeply and powerfully interconnected because we were created to be in relationship with each other. Disasters like the coronavirus tear away at the convenient fallacy of self-reliance, the rugged spirit of individualism which animates our country is simply a myth. Creating a vaccine, reaching the moon, mapping the genome, these would all be impossible without teams of collaborators working side by side to figure out complex solutions. Paradoxically, though the pandemic forced us to self-isolate, it was in this isolation and separation that it became even more evident how much we rely on each other. From driveway coffees to drive-by bar mitzvah celebrations, Zoom seders and Zoom shivas, we have found ways to transcend the distance because we need each other. As we were moving through the initial phases of the lockdown, I had this aha moment in which I understood one of Torah's most important teachings in a new light. Love the stranger as you love yourself. The Torah instructs us repeatedly, more than any other teaching in the Torah. You know, I've always struggled with the idea that we could love the stranger, not just care for the stranger, but actually love him or her as much as we might love ourselves. But the coronavirus gives us new insight. By caring for ourselves, by washing our hands, remaining at home, wearing a mask, not only are we keeping ourselves and our families healthy, we are also caring for the stranger. In loving ourselves and caring for ourselves, we are loving and honoring the stranger as well. What happens to me will affect you. What happens to you impacts me. This is no longer an abstract concept, but our stark reality. Everything we do or don't do is a moral choice that impacts circles far beyond us. This realization is an absolute antidote to the politics of polarization and paranoia we are experiencing in our country and beyond today. It's not me against you. It's not us against them. We are in this together, battling the raging storm, furiously paddling and hanging on to each other for dear life. As we live through this extraordinary period of global lockdown and unprecedented worldwide shared enterprise, we witness the selfless devotion of so many who demonstrated a sense of universal obligation to serve and protect each other. We cheered the noble doctors and nurses and essential hospital workers across the world, many of whom gave up contact with their own families to serve others. And for me, this was also personal. My daughter Hannah is a medical resident at UC Davis in California. I saw photos of her looking like an astronaut in all of her protective gear. I heard stories from the front lines of the wards. I felt her exhaustion and anxiety, but she never wavered in her commitment to her patients. Of course, I was worried about her. I'm a Jewish mother after all. But more than worry, I felt an awesome sense of pride for her and all those others who are willing to take risks and put the well-being of others ahead of their own needs. Many of us were awakened to a new sense of appreciation, not only for our doctors and nurses, but for essential workers who mop hospital floors, who drive trucks, work factories, and staff Publix so that we might have dinner on our tables. I read the story about 43 men who lived for an entire month inside the Braskem petrochemical plant in Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania. Braskem produces raw material for face masks and surgical gowns. And the workers figured that if they got sick, it would slow production. So they volunteered to stay in the plant and work long shifts and sleep on the floor on air mattresses. They called it a live-in. At one point, their families held a drive-by parade so they could wave through the windows. And there were individuals who reached out to help in whatever way possible, including several members of our congregation who made masks, donated money to feed children who could no longer rely on school lunches, grocery shopped for older neighbors, and others who tried creative ways to sustain local business. You can hear a few of their stories recorded for this holiday on our website, and I encourage you to listen to their inspiring words. And there were friends who tried to support each other through the difficult sicknesses, losses, and deaths. My colleague at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas told me about a beloved member of his community who had a death in the family in the early days of lockdown, when no one could attend a funeral or properly mourn. And so instead, their friends organized 2 rows of cars in the temple parking lot so the mourners could drive through the lines and feel their friends' love and support surrounding them. And there are others, thousands and thousands of them, willing to risk their health and lives to participate in clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccines. In 1941, 28-year-old French writer Albert Camus began work on a novel about a virus that spreads uncontrollably from animals to humans and ends up destroying half the population of a town. The Plague, regarded as one of the greatest European post-war novels, feels eerily prescient this year. Many understood that Camus was not writing about a specific viral plague, but rather about the recent Nazi occupation of France and the spread of fascism throughout Europe. In one of the most important lines in the book, Camus wrote, "This whole thing is not about heroism, it's about decency. It may seem a ridiculous idea, but the only way to fight the plague is with decency," he wrote. Through all the horror, loss, pain, and deprivation of this COVID-19 plague, an uber lesson emerges. As the world gets more deeply intertwined and interdependent, everyone's behavior, everyone's values, everyone's choices matter more than ever. Recognition of our shared fragility must lead to what Camus identifies as our only weapon against the plague: human decency. In this way, every single one of us has the capacity to fight back. Masks, hand hygiene, and social distance may keep us safe, but ameliorating the plague requires more of us. Each kind and selfless act we do sets ripples of positivity in motion, which become swells of support. Professor of social science at Yale University, Nicholas Christakis, has done groundbreaking research on how our acts of decency become exponentially magnified. In his book, Connected: How Your Friends' Friends' Friends Affect Everything You Feel, Think, and Do, he discusses the influence we have over the people we know, and consequently the people they know, demonstrating how our behavior is actually contagious. It is true that we can look at each other with suspicion because each one of us is a potential vector of disease. But it's also true that each one of us is a vector for hope, kindness, joy, and decency. It's hard to tell with all of us wearing masks these days, yet we know that when someone smiles at us, our first instinct is to smile back. That's how joy and love are spread. And when we teach or mentor someone, demonstrate concern, care for the community, we are not only improving our immediate world, but we are setting a positive chain of actions into motion which send waves of positivity into the universe. Our tagline for our synagogue during this trying time has been Temple Beth Sholom, TBS, together but separate. The truth is, I miss you. But even as we are unable to gather in person, we are finding ways to transcend the distance because we need each other. I've loved seeing so many of your faces in Zoom classes and gatherings as separate boxes that bounce across my screen, Brady Bunch style, if you're old enough to get that reference. Though separated by lines, these boxes represent the building blocks for our connection. And these building blocks extend far beyond our screens. They are an infinite web of humanity. On this Rosh Hashanah, as we celebrate the anniversary of creation, may our eyes be open to what has always been there, God's invisible lines connecting each of us to each other, those we love and those who are strangers. We are all in the same storm. Let us battle it together, finding shelter in each other, our shared responsibility, and our shared destiny. Amen.